Welcome. You are listening to Chicas from China, the podcast where we talk about female travel, finding community, and breaking stereotypes. I'm your host, Samantha Shank, and today we're going to be talking about finding community while traveling. I'm joined with Megan Lee. Hi, Megan.
Hey Sam, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. I am really excited for today's episode. We are talking about how to make friends abroad, how to create community, and ways that we can just meet people while traveling.
Absolutely. So, my first solo trip was 2 years ago, and I was really nervous because I love the idea of traveling solo. And the reason I had gone alone was because I couldn't find anyone else to go with. But I don't necessarily enjoy solo traveling in terms of being all alone. So, we're here to break down those misconceptions that solo means alone when traveling.
Yes, definitely. And I think that when people think of being solo, they feel like you might be lonely, right? I rarely feel that way. I feel like there's a lot of different ways that you can make friends and meet people, right? So we're going to talk about some of those items today. You and I are both in several Facebook groups, and this is one of the main ways that I like to meet people. Sam and I actually met through a Facebook group called Host a Sister. If you're not familiar with it, Host a Sister is a Facebook group that's all women. It has about 600,000 members now, which is insane. Essentially, it is couch surfing for females. And there are several types of items that you can post about, right? So you can look at people who are hosts, people who have an extra bedroom or a couch that they have available if you want to be their guest. You can also be a host yourself if you have something like that available. In addition, you can also post for meetups. So if you're traveling through a country or a city for a set period of time, a lot of people will post to meet up or have dinner or whatnot just to hang out. And
Yeah,
Sam and
you
I
celebrated
actually
your
met from the group.
birthday with a group of girls, a group of strangers last year because you were all alone in a new city and needed to make friends.
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty cool. I was in Nuremberg, Germany, for my birthday, which is in December, and I didn't want to be alone. So I just posted saying, "Hey, does anybody want to grab dinner with me for my birthday?" And several women actually did come out. We went to this restaurant. Some of them even brought presents like wine and balloons, and I was astounded because I'd never met any of these women. And I think it's testament to the female travel community where other people who are locals want to meet other people. Everyone wants to kind of support each other.
That's what I've noticed too. When I tell people I'm from Los Angeles and if they share a negative experience they had with Los Angeles, I'm so sad. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love the city so much. And it's really sad that you had a bad experience there. So anytime someone comes to LA, I try to make their experience as good as possible because the city's amazing and I want everyone to see how beautiful and amazing it is. In each city I've been to, I feel like people are very welcoming and they're wanting to show you the best of their city. My first time couch surfing was in Stockholm, Sweden. And so I had posted on this Facebook group saying, hey, I would like a host. And this was my first time international couch surfing. I had done it once in the US. And it was interesting because my host had actually known some of the people that I was meeting up with later in Baltimore. They had gone to school together and had even been in the same classes. That was just like a really random connection. She was an expat. She was from India and she had lived in Burbank, California for a few years and now is now living in Stockholm. And so it was really interesting to get that outsider's perspective on what it's like in Stockholm. It was my first time in Europe, my first time abroad solo, all of these things. And I was really nervous with everything. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what if something happens? What if something goes wrong? I've learned to assuage, is that the right word? From those fears. But at the time, I was like so freaked out about everything. And it was nice to have a backup in case something ever went wrong on the trip. And I've always had a sister to kind of rely on if anything went wrong. But it went really well. And she introduced me to a friend, and the friend and I had random mutuals on Facebook, which was super weird. This random guy from Sweden. I've never been to Europe before. He's Yeah, it was just a really crazy and interesting the people you can meet and the connections you can find, even when you're thousands of miles away from home.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I mean, small world. So you talked a little bit about your couch surfing experience, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that because a lot of people who travel solo, especially females, are not necessarily comfortable with the idea of crashing on someone's couch, right? If we don't know the person, safety is a really big issue for women as we're traveling, right? Especially if maybe the couch surfing host is a male, or even like a woman who we don't know in an area that we're not familiar with. So, can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, Sam, and kind of getting over that hurdle?
It was definitely hard at first. Like I said, I was really paranoid the first time I had gone abroad. I was freaking out. But I think one of the benefits of the Facebook group, we talked a little bit about this before, but it was the ability to see the Facebook profile of someone and I'm like, okay, she's obviously real. She like been in Burbank. There's pictures of her in Burbank. She's at least been here to a certain extent. And I think that that helped with like the safety perspective. I was hosted by a male for the first time in Singapore last year. I was really hesitant to find a male host, but Singapore was really expensive. I was striking out on the female host, and I turned to couchsurfing.com. Previously, I had some really mixed experiences on there, but my host was also Asian because he's Singaporean. And he had traveled a lot throughout Latin America and he spoke Spanish and was learning French. So we had a lot in common. And I reached out to him and he said he'd host me. We got along really well. I ended up really enjoying his roommate and we hung out until 3 a.m. several nights in a row when I was in Singapore. And my next host in Singapore, because I try not to stay with anyone for more than a couple nights, just because I've noticed you'll have better luck as like finding a host because 2 nights isn't that long, but then like 4 days is a long time to host someone. So my second host was also male. I was his first female guest and he was super kind, respectful. His roommates, which were of both genders, were super kind and welcoming, and they were all really amazing. And I still follow several of them on Instagram, and they reply to my stories, and they were great. So I think it's really about like reading reviews and just kind of getting a vibe for the person. I feel like through the reviews, you can really tell a lot about a person. Sometimes you have to kind of like read between the lines or something because some I know Couchsurfing was having issues with people afraid of retaliation and bad reviews. But if you're just like looking like between the lines, if there's anything, if it's all from all females or if it's all from males, like look for those different red flags. But I got really lucky with both of my Couchsurfing hosts.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I haven't stayed at a male couch surfing host yet. I still have to kind of make that step, but I have stayed at a couple of female hosts, just mainly in the US. I haven't crashed at people's houses overseas. I think it's great because there's so many people who are welcoming and they are just chill people, right? And I think one of the biggest things for women is safety. And then also cleanliness, I think is a big one, and not really knowing what you're going into. And I will say that a lot of it's communication, right? Like you mentioned profiles, photos, things like that, like really getting to know someone's interests. I had a really great experience staying in someone's house in New York. So it was actually in Jersey City, which is across the river from New York. But this woman was great. I found her through Hostess Sister, and she let me stay at her place for 5 days. She said I could stay longer if I wanted to. And she gave me my own bedroom. We shared a bathroom, but she made breakfast, I think, 3 of the nights, and it was just great. I mean, you don't expect that type of hospitality, right? And so I also kind of want to dig into a little bit of the etiquette around couch surfing. When you are at someone's place, I think that it's really important that if you are getting, a free stay for a couple of days, to be courteous. And that might not be something that is really thought about or talked about, right? So, like, for example, what I do is if, regardless of how long I stay, right, I try to like bring them something small, maybe like a gift or a chocolate or something. And if it's a little bit longer, like a 4 or 5 night stay, I'll definitely make them lunch or dinner, things like that, help them clean up and do the dishes around the house, or maybe even pet sit. So whatever really they need or that you can see that you can contribute, I think it's really important.
Absolutely. And we have both hosted before, and we've had our share of not necessarily rude guests. I think rude is a strong word, but just guests that we didn't feel as appreciative of. I know that as a host, you both get a lot of requests. And on Couchsurfing, I've gotten dozens of requests that are obviously like copy and paste messages. So they're not personalized and they're just people looking for a free stay. So I think if you are looking to get into the Couchsurfing community to make friends, one of the best ways you can get into it is give back to the community. That doesn't mean that's not even a monetary thing. It's going to meetups, getting to know the girls in the group or the people in the group. And then in general, like when you are being hosted, like showing those like little common courtesies. And again, it doesn't have to be like you don't have to be rich to do this. You don't have to be a millionaire. One of the girls I hosted, she brought me back candies from Canada. Again, this candies probably cost, like, under $5, but it was a really thoughtful gesture, and then she bought me Shake Shack. So just again, like, little very, like, little small gestures showed, hey, she was very appreciative of me and appreciated, like, getting to know me, and then, yeah, we hung out one night, but it was just, like, those little things that I think can add up. And like you were saying, for like the larger stays or for the more expensive cities, I was in New York City and I had asked this friend of a friend, I had met him once, but I am super frugal and New York City is extremely expensive. And I said, hey, can I like crash on your couch for a few days? So I split it up. I crashed with two guys. I slept underneath their table, literally, for a couple nights. And it was friends of a friend. I had met them both twice, but I was really good friends with all of their friends from high school. And I got there and I'm like, "Hey, you guys have like a towel?" And he's like, "Did you bring one?" I'm like, "No." And so he brings me back this wet towel from his bedroom. And despite all of this, the wet towel that we both apparently shared, I'm just gonna forget about it. He was really nice, and I ended up buying them ramen, and I told a mutual friend the story, and they were laughing their heads off, and they were giving him a hard time about it. But the second guy, I had asked him to stay, and he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll just stay with my partner." And he gave me his luxury Brooklyn apartment for several days by myself, which was super generous. So I
Wow.
bought him a really nice
Generous.
bottle of wine. I didn't want to cheap on like a $15 bottle of wine because this was a super generous give, and I was super thankful for it. So just like those little things, I don't think he was expecting anything, but it shows like, hey, I'm appreciative of you and thank you so much for doing this for me.
So I think in terms of meeting people, couch surfing is definitely a great avenue. I think, it's sometimes people, have that anticipation, right? Because we don't know who it is and maybe we won't get along with them. And the thing is, you might not necessarily have to like be best friends with a person. I say with people who are much older, different generation, and I say with people who are younger than me. And I think that, the trend that you see overall is that people are good people.
Mhm.
And I think that, kind of segues into how we can meet good people while traveling, right? So, like, if we want to make friends just for the day in a city, if we want to travel with somebody maybe for a longer period of time, how do we do that? I know that you and I have traveled with different people that we met off of Facebook groups. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Sam?
One of the things I look out for when I'm looking for a hostel is a hostel that has events or walking tours because usually you're going to find people that are traveling alone or just with a friend and are looking for a connection. So I've had a lot of really good experiences through there. You have mentioned WhatsApp groups before. Sometimes hostels or even cities will have WhatsApp groups in their community. I think it's Girls Love Travel or Girls Gone International that has the WhatsApp
Yeah,
groups for
Girls Gone.
cities.
Yeah, there's Girls Gone International. There's a couple of cities that I found with Instagram pages that also have specific WhatsApp groups. And that's interesting too. It's not specific to a hostel necessarily, but like somehow I've come across these Instagram groups that also have like individual WhatsApp groups. For example, when I was in Japan, I found one, and there was a general one for all of Japan, and there was one for Osaka, another group for Kyoto, there's one for Tokyo, and then there was a group for girls in Japan, so there's all these different subgroups within it. And that's how I met a lot of people when I was actually traveling solo through Japan. And it was amazing. And everybody in the groups spoke English and they were all in the same boat. They wanted to meet people. Some people wanted to go out. Some of us wanted to eat. I think that was a really great way to, meet people without having it be creepy in a way or weird.
Definitely, and I think one of the benefits of meeting someone from those Facebook groups is you are all foreigners, you're all tourists or travelers, so you don't feel weird asking someone, "Hey, can we do all the touristy things?" Whereas if you're going to London and you're staying with a London native, you're probably not gonna say, "Hey, can we go to Big Ben and all of the touristy things?" Because, I mean, they live there. So I think that that's one thing fun is exploring everything new for the first time with someone who, like you said, like, we're all human, we're all here to explore the world and get the most out of life, and so it's fun to just find a partner for the day that wants to do that. And we both had experiences. Sometimes these people were just in our lives for a day, sometimes we thought they were cool and they stuck around. What are some people that you've met that ended up staying around?
Oh, that's a good question. So I met a really cool girl when I was hosting in LA. And so I had a girl stay with me for 2 weeks. And she is originally from Paris. And so she crashed on my couch. She was super helpful. I had 2 cats. She helped me take care of my cats. I said that I did have plans to go to Paris sometime in the future and that we could catch up again there. No set plan at the time. I did end up going to Paris about 6 months later, and I hit her up, and she actually let me stay in her place for about a week total. And so that was great because it was, a way of kind of like a home exchange type of thing, right? Where like she crashed with me and I crashed with her, but now we're good friends, and I've hung out with her friends. You know, she's actually hung out with my friends when she was in LA, and I think that's something that you don't really expect when you start out, maybe traveling or even hosting other people, that you'll connect with people from over the world in their home country, right? Sometime in the future. So that was cool.
Yeah, and when I was in South Korea, you had connected me with Shelly. You said, "Hey, I think you'd like this girl," and you connected with me with a few people in Asia. Some people I wasn't able to meet because of schedules, whatever. But with Shelly, we got talking, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you sound really cool." She was super cool. She was super badass. She took me on her motorcycle. I'm like, "Girl, you are amazing." We both find out we work in education, which was crazy. And then I decided to stay a few extra days in Seoul because I loved it there. And my hostel was fine, but I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's a hostel in a shared place. And she's like, "Hey, do you want my apartment?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, sure." So it was really nice to just relax in Seoul. At the time, my feet were killing me, and it was nice just to chill in my own private space, have a nice clean bathroom with a shower curtain, which I had not seen in a very long time since I had been in the US. If you have been to Asia, you know, like they just don't use shower curtains. So it was just nice to connect with another American and get a feel for Seoul.
Shelly is super cool. Hopefully, we can get her on as a guest for our podcast sometime in the future. But you mentioned staying in hostels. So typically, I also stay in hostels most of the time, if I can't find a pet sit or anything like that. And I prefer hostels over hotels because they are much more affordable, and a lot of them are great. So I think there's also a misconception about hostels, especially from the movie Hostel.
I was gonna
Some
say,
people
when
think
you
that
say like Hostel in America, everyone is like, "Is that like the movie?" I'm like, "Oh my goodness, no."
yeah, no, that's ridiculous. They are a little bit different depending on the country. So, for example, in Japan, I thought the hostels were great. They're very clean. They provided amenities, soaps, all of that, and everyone's very respectful. And the majority, if not all of the hostels I stayed in were pod style. So very private. You had your own like enclosed space around your bed. In Europe, a lot of them are like bunk bed styles. They may or may not have curtains, but that's just how it is. But overall, I do feel like they're very safe and clean. And kind of going off about meeting friends, I think if you want to meet friends in a certain city or country, staying in hostels is definitely the way to go. I love meeting people at hostels, and especially for our age demographic, right? So, you know, within like the maybe late teens, early 20s into the 30s, there's a lot of people who are traveling and want to meet other people within the same age range. It's great if you want to take like a day tour somewhere or like a walking tour that the hostel hosts. And most hostels will have some sort of social activity that facilitates that type of interaction. And they're generally more affordable than if you were going on to TripAdvisor or something and booking the same tour. So I always do those. I've met some really cool people through like bike tours and walking tours and things like that. I know that there's a lot of pub crawl type of drinking activities. I typically don't join those, but you can definitely join those to meet a lot of people that way.
I'm not a huge drinker either, but when you are going to those pub crawls, I mean, you can just go for the social aspect. You don't necessarily have to get smashed or anything. I've met a lot of cool people through like my hostel, and I've met a lot of people that like the idea of hostels in the community, but they prefer their own private rooms. And a lot of hostels do have those private rooms. They might be the same rate as a local hotel, but you'll have your own room and bathroom, but you still get that feel and
Yes.
experience of a hostel. So if you're like, this hostel life is not for me, I want my own space, we totally get it. But there are ways to make like there are benefits to like the hostel experience, specifically with getting to know other travelers in particular. I remember in Guatemala, my friend Claudia and I were just sitting in the lobby, and Guatemala is very Hispanic, obviously, and then there's a lot of white tourists, and we're Asian. And this guy like makes eye contact with me, and I made eye contact with him, and I don't remember who said hey first, but it was very much a hi, we're gonna be talking because we're the only Asian people here. And then I ended up visiting him in Tokyo, which was a lot of fun. And the same thing happened to me in Ecuador. I was in a four bed, but I was in there alone for the first night. And the second night, I saw someone's things, and I'm like, "Dang it, I really wish I had this room alone." And then looked at her and I saw she was Asian, and I'm like, "Wait, what the heck?" And she looked at me and was also like, "What the heck?" She ended up being super cool. She was from South Korea, and she had worked in Panama at the time and was just visiting in Ecuador. But I also ended up visiting her when I was in Asia because she was one of those people I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're super cool." It was crazy to see Spanish speaking Asians like me and how we all ended up here because the journey from Asia to South America is not easy in any way. Like you usually have to have a layover in the US. For me, it was most interesting to meet these people again later because it shows how small the world is in general. Like it's not as big as we think. I recently had I met a guy when I was in Peru. We had a really great time. He ended up staying with me for a few days in LA, and then my friend is currently meeting up with him in Australia. So it's just crazy to see
That's
like
crazy.
yeah, like the full circle. And he's invited me to Australia, which I will definitely take him up on in the future. But it's just like the important like the people that you meet, like it's like you can like they can be temporary in your life, but they also can come back if like you guys had a connection or something. Because I think that that's one thing that was frustrating for me at the beginning was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm only gonna meet this person once. It's not worth my time or my effort. But these people actually can. Like you guys might not become best friends, but you guys can. You can definitely have a more meaningful connection than just a one day stand. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. Just going back to my story about the girl that I met who was visiting from Paris to LA, I went and visited her in Paris, right? And there's several people that I met around like Europe and Asia that we plan to like we still keep in touch and we talk, right? It's not like it's just that one time thing. We talk and we plan to travel in the future or at least meet up somewhere. And that's really exciting. And it makes you feel like the world is so much smaller and that now you have a community of people that you can kind of reach out to around the world. Another example I have is I was walking the Camino de Santiago last year in Europe in October. And the Camino de Santiago is basically a pilgrimage, and there's 8 or 9 different routes, and you walk the whole way, or you can bike and you end up at the Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain. So the route that I was taking is the Camino Frances, which is the one that starts in the south of France and crosses through northern Spain. So that one takes about 30 to maybe 45 days of continuous walking. And I had met a girl in one of the hostels, and she was so funny and very entertaining, and I loved her. She was from Hungary, and we clicked right away and we hung out, while we were there. And I ended up going to Budapest later on, probably about 2 months later, and visiting her in Budapest. And then she showed me around that city because she gave me a lot of pointers for that. She gave me a lot of pointers for Berlin, where she is currently living. It seems like all right, now I can, have a friend, I can have a resource and someone to go to, and doesn't feel scary. And I'm actually going back to finish the Camino Santiago this spring, and I headed up for some tips too. So like any sort of hostel tips or packing, whatever, it's great. So yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to socialize or stay in hostels or meet people and just put yourself out there.
Speaking of community, I think one of the things that we had found really beneficial was the bachata community because each little city has a bachata community. We started out in LA and then we found that community in Mexico City. And then you continued dancing in other cities throughout Europe. What was that experience like?
I thought it was really cool. So Sam and I are both dancing bachata and salsa. I love the LA dancing because it's kind of where we started. And I wanted to continue it as I traveled, right? I'm still fairly new to it. And so I actively went to seek out dance opportunities in the big cities in Europe, like London, Paris, Berlin. It was amazing because dance really is a language that is universal. And so I was going to dance classes in Paris and I couldn't speak French, and the majority of people could. So obviously, then we're going to tailor their language to me. But you just watch them and you do the dance and then you do the social dance where you rotate partners. And most of them didn't speak English, but that was okay. And we still danced and it was fun and it was amazing. And it was the same in Berlin, which is a German speaking city, right? So, and I was very impressed because the communities are so strong over there. And if you have a hobby that is global or universal like dance, then you can find a community pretty much anywhere in the world. Sam, you had done some bachata dancing in Japan when you were there as well. Communities are all over the
Was
world, but what
too.
was that like?
Yeah, I was really surprised, and I think it's one of those things. Google is amazing. You can find anything out there, and I've been able to find these like crazy niche communities. We had met Rumi in Mexico City, and she's from Japan. And at the time, we both happened to be in Tokyo, and she said, "Hey, let's go to bachata on Friday." I said, "Okay." So we went to a bachata class. I was super newbie at the time. I still am newbie, but I was more newbie at the time. And the class happened to be in English, which I was thankful for. But it's interesting also to see how different dance styles are throughout the world. So the Japanese were more like stiff, whereas in like Latin America, it was more fluid and sensual. But it's interesting to see like the exact same dance in a different format and style. And I think that that's what I really liked. That's what I was craving before I was traveling, is just seeing those different life and human experiences. But whatever your hobby is, I'm sure you can find a community with anything, whether it be writers. I am also an adoptee. And in a lot of the cities I've been to, I've been able to meet up with adoptees. We were talking about going to Amsterdam, and I said, "Hey, I know an adoptee there." Scheduling conflicts happened, but I just find those like niche communities. And when you find those niches, I think it's easier to make friends because you automatically have something else in common. So not only are you both in the city and both presumably enjoying travel, but you also like this really interesting or niche hobby, which I think helps to break the ice a little bit. And it can kind of segue and show, like, hey, we're all human at the end of the day, whether you are in Iraq, whether you are in America or Russia, we all like cooking, dancing, singing, that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And what I love about it is that you get to meet a lot of locals as well. Whereas, maybe if you're joining a travel group or maybe people through hostels, then they are for sure travelers. But if you join a community that is a specific niche or a hobby, then you're more likely to meet people who just live there, right? They're from the area, and then they can then maybe help you with like tips or give you suggestions, recommendations for the area. So that's really cool. And, like you said, whether it's, any sort of like active hobby, if you like cooking, if you like art, there's always something. And the beauty of social media and the internet in the modern world that we live in is that you can find anything online. And as long as there's a Wi-Fi connection or you have data on your phone, then you can find it. It's more of a matter of going to seek out that information. And I would say that, even if, say, you're somebody that doesn't have a specific hobby, or maybe you don't feel like you're super good at any one thing, there's communities out there for expats or people who, want to make friends because maybe those people just moved to the city and maybe they're not traveling, but maybe they've been there for 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 months, and they're still trying to get their bearings and meet friends. So one of the groups that I loved is Girls Gone International, and it is a group through Facebook, and they have chapters in most major cities around the world, is what I've experienced. Definitely in Europe, and through the groups, they have all sorts of stuff. So they have events that they put on several times a month, whether it be movie nights or brunches or art and wine, things like that, all the way to discussion boards where if you need housing and someone wants to sublease their place, you can find that, or at least tips for where to live in the city. I went to a lot of Girls Gone International events when I was in Europe, and I thought that was super fun. Most of the people were expats, and so they weren't really from the cities that I was visiting, but they had lived there for several years already. So they already knew the city through like an outsider's perspective as well as an insider's perspective. And I thought that was really cool.
Definitely. And my first host from Europe, from in Stockholm, she was an expat, and I had met several other expats. And so getting that expat experience or perspective is kind of the best of both worlds with meeting people in the community. This wraps up today's episode of Chicas from China. Thank you so much for tuning in. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Chicas from China, and you can find show notes about this episode on chicasfromchina.com. See you next episode.